Oops. Today? Hi, Maya. Beautiful day today.
I saw that. Yes, good morning. And to everybody who is watching now, welcome to the Japanese Politics One-on-One, episode 275, where Timothy Langley and I, as a host, talk about Japanese politics and the latest events in Japanese politics. Timothy Langley gives us the briefing, and then we go into a Q&A session. So I hope that you're looking forward to the Q&A session as well, in addition, of course, to the briefing, because without the briefing, we cannot have the second part. So, Timothy, good morning. And I can see that you are in a beautiful place this morning. So maybe you can give us a little bit more about that place, what's going on, and so on.
Great. Thank you, Maya. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to May 17th. And this is our 275th episode, Maya. It's 270 times consecutively every Sunday with you, our audience of Japan hands and budding Japan hands and people who are interested in what's going on in Japanese politics and what it means over the larger course of relations with your country or trade relations. What's the economy like in Japan? So I'd like to get into that. Today, as you can see, I'm reporting from a huge parking lot in front of the magnificent Hotel New Otani here in Akasaka. Later today, or this morning, I'll be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Rolls-Royce and Bentley Owners Club, which I established in 1996 while I was general counsel at Apple Computer. The two issues are completely separate, though. I was working, I had a job, and I established this club just for a need to get together with people who are also restoring these old cars and focusing on preserving and keeping these cars on the road. Anyway, 30 years ago, so today is a celebration of sorts, so I got kind of dressed up. So it'll be a big deal. In the background, you might see some of the cars flowing in, maybe towards the Q&A portion. So keep your eye out for that. I hope it's not too distracting. But if you happen to note that going on in the background, it is because we'll have maybe 30 or 40 of the cars show up of many vintages, of many different ages. And then we'll have a nice gathering and a celebration and that sort of thing. So it's somewhat fitting if you think about it, because this week Japan felt much less like drift. It's not Tokyo drift and Rolls Royces and Bentleys, but the drift that is going on here, it's not a drift, it's more like positioning. Japan is actually being more strategic about it. Trump met with Xi in Beijing. Secretary Scott Bessent was in Tokyo on Monday of this last week. The yen resumed its weakening march, even though it got strengthened over Golden Week with the intervention. The Bank of Japan is increasingly boxed in. Ms. Takaichi spent the week managing both policy and party politics simultaneously. There's been a lot of activity there that I'd like to get into. And Nagatacho is already abuzz ahead of next week's launch of the new pro-Takaichi study group, Kokuryoku. You might have heard about this, you might not have. It's a group that's put together, rah, we support the Prime Minister, set up by Taro Aso. It's a pretty big deal and something that you should pay attention to. At the same time, inside the Diet, constitutional revision discussions are accelerating. There's imperial succession debates that have returned. They had a big meeting just on Friday. Tensions surrounding Hormuz continue, as you would expect, and Japan appears to be improvising its way through a remarkably complicated strategic environment with more competence than many outsiders had expected. So there's a lot going on. This morning, I'd like to slow it all down, talk about it, talk about what the implications are and what the trajectory is likely to be in the very near term. Then we can close that up. Give me about 30 minutes to talk about that, Maya, and then we can roll into the Q&A as these magnificent cars begin to roll into the parking lot behind me. Back to you, Maya.
Thank you. All right, to everybody watching us now and everybody who will watch us a little bit later during the day or the week. Remember that we are very, very grateful for your help in spreading the word about these briefings. You can share them hopefully with your friends and colleagues or family members if you think that they're informative and they can be helpful to people doing business in Japan or living here. Because, well, Japanese politics. Well, it looks really on the surface, it looks kind of boring, but
Yeah.
there are so many deep currents, and if you follow these currents, you will be better prepared and know what to expect for your business and, of course, your life here in Japan as well. So please help us spread the word. Also, let us know that you have been here. You can hit like, subscribe, follow, and please comment because we're looking forward to your comments and questions for the Q&A session. And well, that's what I would like you to remember. Please communicate with us. So, Timothy, it's over to you. And I believe that there are so many things that you're going to talk about today. So, I'm not going to take any more time.
Thank you very much, Maya. So you can't really talk much about Japan until you kind of encapsulate it in the context of what's gone on in history. And today I'm in a historical place, the Akasaka New Otani. This is an older hotel. I think it's still 5-star. I'm not quite sure. But 60 years ago, Ampo was the big issue happening here in Tokyo. Tokyo University was just uh, absolutely swamped with protesters. The Diet was filled with protesters. There was a huge political turmoil. And the protests were against the revised US Security Treaty. In 1960, I was a kid growing up in Richmond, Virginia. 2 years later, John Kennedy was assassinated and the Vietnam War took off. And then my military father received orders to go to Okinawa. So the Ampo explosion, the regard for preserving Japan and not being embroiled in U.S. concerns and being pulled into this Cold War conflict. So Vietnam at that point was kind of bubbling, but it wasn't really on fire. And because things took a left turn there, Japan became really quickly embroiled in what was going on in Vietnam too. And I ended up moving into to Okinawa 1963, about 1963 until 1969. So basically, I grew up on Okinawa with this kind of this this um, cloud of things going on in Tokyo, the war or the protests against the war, against the Americans being, kind of infiltrated and dominating Japanese politics and that sort of thing. But they did eventually revise the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, and hundreds of thousands of citizens, they just surrounded the Diet in protest. They feared Japan was becoming too embroiled, entangled in American Cold War, and they just didn't like it. And what makes this the AMPO discussions relevant is that it's not that history repeats itself mechanically, but there are many of the same echoes that occur under the surface. For example, alliance management, constitutional identity, and anxiety about Japan being drawn into a broader geopolitical confrontation. And you can see the traces of that even in today and even in the conversations that we frequently have here on this show. So I'd like to move into what's going on here in Japanese politics, but keeping these kind of historical things in mind, it's an echo. It's not a mechanical reflection of what's going to happen. But Japan is a very difficult place to kind of get your head around, but it's because of historical precedent and just the way the country and the society works here. And maybe through this briefing, you understand a little bit better how that sort of thing works. One thing that stood out very clearly this week was Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi spending far more time managing political relationships inside the LDP itself. She has suffered a little bit of criticism by being somewhat ensconced and kind of secure inside the Prime Minister's residence. She's a policy wonk. She reads the documents, and she's mostly focused on policy. But this week, as a consequence of those criticisms, I think she's starting to come out of the closet. There were repeated reports this week of lunches, dinners, Conte consultations, and factional coordination meetings. It was really pretty remarkable. On Friday, she held a steak lunch with no other than Taro Aso, the Secretary General, Mr. Suzuki Shinichi, Hagiura Koichi, and Kajiyama Hiroshi. These are four powerhouses that are dominating the movement inside the LDP, not the LDP, inside the LDP, but also inside the Diet with regard to legislation. So they said we don't have a full readout, but they discussed Hormuz and supplemental budgeting and the need for that and political coordination inside the party. But the day before, she had another meeting, I think it was a 2-hour meeting with Kobayashi Takayuki, with Nishimura Yasutoshi, with Matsuo Hirokazu, with Arimura Haruko, who is the minister in charge of dealing with the foreigners and revising the business visas, that sort of thing. And later, separately, with Kishida Fumio. So this isn't random scheduling. This is like a major step change. And it suggests that the prime minister is increasingly focused not only on governing administratively, but on consolidating political durability inside the party itself. You can see that, you can sense that. It was somewhat lacking in the past, but now it looks like it's coming to the fore. At least it was this last week. Critics inside the LDP, as you know, have been quietly criticizing her for being too heavily focused on policy execution while neglecting relationship building. This week looked very different, and it looks like that might be a new pattern that she's going to be pursuing. Attention has already turned towards next week's inaugural Kokuryoku gathering, which is a group that it's not a faction, it's not a Benkyokai, it's a rah-rah for the prime minister. This was set up by Taro Aso. Interestingly, you know, his role, his play, he's undoubtedly the most powerful politician in Japanese politics today. He is the leader of the only standing faction, 88 years old, and he came up with this idea to support Takaichi through an amalgamation of a lot of people within the LDP and some of them who are, you know, kind of flirting around the LDP. But a lot of heavy hitters are involved in that. They had their pre-meeting, and then their inaugural meeting will be on Thursday of this coming week. And particularly noteworthy in the guest list of this launch of Kokuryoku. Kokuryoku is spelled in two characters. Koku was kuni, and Ryoku is chikara, so a powerful country. And that kind of indicates it's on the far right hand side of the political spectrum, and it's not. Ms. Takaichi did not join the first setup meeting. She will undoubtedly join the second meeting, which is on Thursday. But it looks like the U.S. Ambassador George Glass will be the guest speaker in this inaugural setting. That's pretty interesting. You've got to imagine this political group being set up by Taro Aso with all sorts of political heavyweights. And at their launch meeting, they have the ambassador of the United States attending as a guest speaker. So that, you know, presence itself just carries a terrific meaning. And I think we need to take that into account. It's also not just revealing of who's attending, but who's not attending. Both Kono Taro and Hayashi Yoshimatsu are reportedly absent from the expected lineup. That's interesting because Kono Taro was a heavy hitter, almost was prime minister, and he's fallen kind of in the background, I think purposely. While Japanese politics takes its own, he's holding back. He is in the Aso faction, as you know, and he's been I think held in reserve, as is perhaps Mr. Hayashi, who is a very important political figure who will undoubtedly be a candidate for prime minister when the time comes. So the fact that he's not on the rah-rah team, and also Kono Taro is not on the rah-rah team, suggests maybe the LDP is functioning to set that up into the future. But in the meantime, she'll be the beneficiary of having all these people, you know, supporting her. In separate news, geopolitically, Tokyo spent much of the week watching Trump, of course, and what happened in Beijing. So the president of the United States left Beijing yesterday. And so there were a couple of things that came out of that. The Takaichi government had reportedly hoped that Trump, and we too hoped that Trump would make a stop in Tokyo on his way to China. I think that would be a little bit too suggestive, a little bit too um, maybe meaningful. So he didn't do that, but instead he did send his Treasury Secretary, Besant, who arrived on his way to rendezvous with the rest of the Trump team. And he spent 2 days here and apparently had some sharp words about the Japanese yen, about intervention, about the economy, about the value of dividends from Japanese government bonds. And that in itself was meaningful. But one of the first phone calls that the president made when he was departing China, not quite back in the United States, but he called Ms. Takaichi and they spent 20 minutes talking. So this is, I think, really good. It reaffirms the kind of unwavering nature of the U.S.-Japan alliance. And apparently they discussed Taiwan, economic security, and Hormuz, as you would expect. But I think Tokyo was reassured by the speed of the call and the priority that President Trump gave to it. I thought it was a wise decision. And she immediately went onto the press and reported on this. She reported on it on Twitter, on X as well. But the deeper concerns still remain the same. It's not abandonment that's being felt here in Tokyo and probably in Seoul as well, but there's persistence and anxiety that Washington and Beijing could increasingly begin managing regional tensions directly between themselves. Not a G20, not a G7, but a G2. And with the G2, then people's voice and their aspirations, their concerns are not potentially being treated with the gravity that the host countries would wish they were. So it's adding another complexity into the mix, and that is, I guess, something to be expected. But it helps explain why, it's not sudden because these sort of things take time, but Japan and South Korea coordination is moving much faster. On Tuesday, the Prime Minister will move to Seoul. She'll go actually to visit the hometown of President Lee Jae-myung for a 2-day meeting in his hometown. So the last time they've got this shuttle diplomacy that they've agreed to, which includes a 2+2, which is in it's in active participation right now. But the fact that he came in 2 months ago and visited her in her hometown, this time she is going to visit him in his hometown, and it's this building of the relationship that for many years Japan and South Korea have lacked, and it's an important critical element in geopolitics and in the regional politics here. So it's important for the United States and it's important to Japan that these two countries mend those fences and begin to operate and coordinate more carefully and more closely together. With the United States moving more independent of, providing the Japan nuclear umbrella and the safety and concern that is provided by having, all of the military bases in Okinawa, I think, there is a reality that's beginning to set in, and you can see that Japan is reacting to that. With regard to the yen and the Bank of Japan and the intervention that we saw during Golden Week, the yen closed out at 158.46 to the dollar, continuing a gradual decline after the Golden Week intervention. You'll remember that just prior to Golden Week, the yen hit 160, and they intervened during Golden Week. They intervened once or twice. We're not quite sure, but we think it was a heavy investment, maybe 10 trillion yen was diverted or invested in propping up the yen. And the yen went down to 155, 156, but it didn't last very long. Even over the Golden Week, it sprung back up, and it's creeping up. Right today, it's 158.4. So there's real trepidation in Japan on two issues. One is that there's going to be volatility in the yen. It's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. And the second concern is that it breaches 160. So there's a lot of concern going on with that. One of the questions that was raised last week, Maya, we didn't get a chance to address it in the Q&A, was when Japan intervenes, and it intervenes in a very big way, it's very it's huge. That to move the markets requires a huge punch. And where does that money come from was the question. And the the Ministry of Finance, what the Ministry of Finance does is it sells part of Japan's enormous foreign reserves holdings, which are primarily dictated in U.S. Treasury securities and dollar assets, and they use those dollars to buy the yen. And these reserves are enormous. Japan owns lots of U.S. Treasury bonds and lots of easy to sell U.S. and foreign assets, and it sells those on the market. It receives dollars in return, and then it invests that. Japan currently holds roughly $1.2 trillion in foreign reserves. That's huge. That's comparable to the entire GDP of Mexico or the economic output of Indonesia. And these reserves have been accumulated gradually over decades through trade surpluses and export earnings and previous intervention operations. So it's kind of like a piggy bank that the Japanese government has held. In practical terms, Japan spent decades building that, and it's one of the largest national financial reserve pools on earth. So the objective is not primarily to push the yen back down to 140 or 150, but policymakers are more concerned about preventing this vacillation and also avoiding the psychologically damaging breaking point of 160. So these pressures continue on the Bank of Japan. They have a 2-day meeting at the end of every month, where they had one maybe today's the 17th, so almost 3 weeks ago, just before Golden Week started. And the next one is in another 2 weeks or so. And in the Bank of Japan meetings, they need to be fully disclosing on what the intervention was, how large it was, where the reserves came from, and that sort of thing. So we'll learn a little bit more. We have to wait until then, but inflation still is sticky. The bond yields are rising, and that was one of the concerns of the U.S. Treasury Secretary. He carries a lot of weight in that. The G7 finance ministers are meeting in France in 2 weeks, right on the cusp of the BOJ meeting. And the markets are they're just increasingly expect another BOJ move later this year, probably in the next 2 meetings or the next 2 months. We are going to hear about that. Besant reportedly delivered a very direct warnings about the yen weakness, about financial expansion, fiscal expansion, and about delayed monetary normalization. Come to the club, guys. Join everybody else and be like them, and don't have your own Japanese way of having your financial assets managed. So there's that sort of thing. So it just leaves Japan trapped in a weak currency pressure. It's rising inflation, continuing to rise, and increasingly expensive borrowing costs. And it's not a comfortable position for the Bank of Japan or for the finance minister or for the prime minister for that matter. But a lot of things are going on to supplement or to take care or to bolster that. And one of those is, Japan's quiet logistical agility in managing the Hormuz Strait situation. So over the last couple of weeks, a couple of tankers have snuck through. We talked last week about the Idemitsu Maru coming through, 2 million barrels, which was allowed to pass through the Hormuz Strait. And there's been a couple of more that come through. And these are the large super tankers. They all hold around 2 million barrels when they hit. But we've had the Idemitsu tanker. We've got the UAE shipments that were routed outside of Hormuz. The Sakhalin delivered ships that were destined for, I believe, Sakhalin or someplace else, but through the existing LNG carve-out exemptions, Japan was able to import that tanker. So the destinations, I don't know how important it is. I mean, 2 million barrels, Japan goes through that in a day and a half, but they hit in Chiba, Kawasaki, and in the Western refinery infrastructures tied to Enios and Idemitsu, so for gasoline production, but gasoline is only one byproduct of cracking the oil, so a lot of other things. And it's becoming clear that Japan's energy bureaucracy and the refiners, the insurers, the shipping firms, and diplomatic channels are coordinating remarkably effectively under pressure. And it not it might not allow Japan to control the situation, but it's demonstrating the considerable logistical agility of Japan to act under those kinds of concerns and still be able to keep things on an even keel. They have not said to the Japanese population, you know, you need to start hoarding Japanese, or you need to start hoarding toilet paper, you need to stop spending money, you need to only drive on every second day, or anything like that. And also the supplemental budget. We need to have a supplemental budget because of the Hormuz. That's being poo-hooed a bit too. The finance secretary, the minister of finance, in fact, said it's unnecessary to have that. But that's a discussion that's continuing to go on. But you know, every time a tanker does make it through, it calms the markets and it stabilizes refinery expectations, and it buys policymakers additional time. So when these ships do come through, it actually is a newsworthy item. And assuming the Hormuz tensions remain contained rather than escalating into direct closure, we don't expect that, Japan can probably continue managing the supply through rerouting and reserve drawdowns, diversified sourcing, and carefully coordinated tanker scheduling. I don't expect it to be much worse than that. And there's one other kind of small but fascinating thing that happened in the meantime. You probably noticed it, that Japanese manufacturers, like making potato chips and the munchies, they're reportedly beginning reducing the color that appears on their packaging. This is heavy printing on plastic packaging to reduce the petrochemical feedstock, because color apparently takes up more of it. But that happened really quickly, and it's rather minor, but it's a very Japanese form of adaptation. They're quiet, they're incremental, and they're implemented rapidly across supply chains. You see that happening so quickly, and then you contrast that to, you know, the complaint about we want to reduce the consumption tax from 8% to 0, but we have trouble because we can't change the cash registers fast enough. There's just some of it is a little bit hard to swallow. But inside the diet, there is momentum everywhere. It's just incredible what's going on. Golden Week was 2 weeks ago. We came back 2 days, Thursday and Friday. And then this last week was a full work week. There's constitutional revision that's right back on the front burner. Retrial reform looks like it will pass, with the LDP position winning on that. Imperial succession is now a hot item. They've had a meeting on Friday about that. Defense spending and the supplemental fiscal pressure that is continuing to bother the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. And the retrial legislation became especially controversial because critics argued that parts of it would kind of put people in double jeopardy, and they give the police and the prosecutors actually more power to retry somebody who's been found guilty. And as most people know, the public prosecutors' success rate in convictions is, you know, 98, 99%. So this should make retrials more difficult under certain circumstances. And with regard to the imperial succession, this is a pretty big deal. It comes up every once in a while. I think maybe this time they will actually do something about it, but it's rather complicated. The central unresolved issue remains whether female members of the imperial family can remain imperial status members even after marriage. If they marry a commoner, are they still part of the imperial family? And so that's part of the controversy. The other part of the controversy is when MacArthur came in, when the war was ended, there was a huge class of imperial family members who were just discounted. They were kind of a what were they called? They were kind of like a cadet branch of the imperial arm. And they removed those. They told those uncles and cousins and sisters and brothers that they're no longer imperial. They don't receive a stipend from the state. They don't have any of the accolades of being in the royal family. The royal family is now the emperor and the empress, the mother and the father, the immediately brothers and sisters and their children, and that's it. So there is some talk about bringing back those cadet branches into the fold, just so that we can continue this this line of from father to son, and that is one of the the driving forces there. It's traditional male line succession. Japan has had it for thousands of years. It goes back farther than any lineage, even in Egyptian times. The Japanese succession is the largest or the longest in human history. So it is something that they want to preserve and something that they're proud of. But consensus just doesn't exist right now. There will be continuing discussions, and I think there might be a move because there is no male heir who is identified at this point in time, and so something needs to happen at one point or another. There are a lot of things going on that are picked up by Bunshun. We report on Bunshun here from time to time. Bunshun is the weekly magazine that comes out. It used to come out every Thursday. People would be lined up at the kiosk or at the kombini to pick up the Thursday morning Bunshun. It looks like they've accelerated. They're now producing them on Wednesday for some reason. I don't know why. But this Bunshun is, gosh, I said earlier about, Taro Aso being the most powerful politician in Japanese politics these days. Takaichi sensei is also, she carries her weight as prime minister, as leader of the LDP. But Bunshun carries a lot of political weight too. You cannot disregard that. It's a prime minister killer if it wants to be. And it's kind of on the attack with the prime minister. It has identified her. The issue that came out on Thursday or Wednesday of this week talked about how she and her husband lived together in the Kante. What are the secret life stories of going on there? And how did she actually become prime minister? Was she attacking her rivals? Did she have a social network kind of campaign? So they're coming up pretty hard. Generally, when Bunshun does that, you have a sense of it. You have a feeling of it weeks beforehand because the investigations and their reporters are asking questions. So I think that's maybe one of the reasons why Mr. Aso came up with this, let's support Takaichi, because he fears that maybe Bunshun is going to be a little bit more effective than he wants it to be. And for him, having less disruption in Japanese politics is better. I'm not sure. I can't read too much into that, but it is kind of funny that spontaneously the LDP comes up with a rah-rah group to support the prime minister, and then we have this article. So this article was critical. Actually, it wasn't just one; it was several of them. And the attacks on the prime minister, sometimes they're effective. Sometimes they're just a flash in the pan, sell more magazines. But if they come back again next week with a follow-up to some of the denials that were provided by the Kante or by the prime minister herself about some of the allegations that were made, that means it's a campaign. That means that they're on to something. And maybe Mr. Aso was right to begin to shore up her forces. But anyway, we'll keep an eye on that. Keep your eye on what's happening with Bunshun in the next week. If they come up with something that defends their positions and makes them more of a protector of the population, which is what they want to be portrayed as. So let's see how that goes. With regard to how Japan is moving geopolitically and globally, the LDP's National Security Committee spent much time this week discussing future defense spending levels. And within that, the drone component received a huge boost. So there are about 48 members of the parliament on the upper house and the lower house who have been comprised into a drone committee. Drones are taking on an increasingly important component of defense spending. But at the National Security Committee, they were talking about this and other things. The hawks in the LDP are now openly discussing defense expenditures exceeding 3.5 of GDP. You'll remember that I think when George Glass, the current ambassador to Japan, was under Senate confirmation, he also was promoting Japan to be not a 2% GDP contributor into its defense expenditures, but 3.5, maybe even a little bit more. And it seems like that story continues now. And in light of what's going on with the United States and their continuing withdrawal from being as supportive as they once were, this looks like it might be an idea that's going to catch hold. 3.5 is almost twice the defense expenditure that Japan is spending now. They had a 5-year plan. They were increase it to 2% under a promise to the United States. We're going to buy lots of military equipment from the United States. We're going to bolster it. We're going to, increase the defenses in the outlying islands that are close to Taiwan. And that 5-year plan ends at the end of this year, actually. It was accelerated a little bit by Ms. Takaichi. But I think that you're going to find another incremental adjustment, and that's a big change, 3.5 or even 3%. So let's keep an eye on that. The debate continues regarding how directly the future security documents should characterize China as a threat. So initially, it was kind of characterized as a threat in the latest assessment, and now the other documents that are coming out of other ministries, there is word coming out from Conte of how we should characterize our relationship with China. And following the trip that President Trump just had, I think there'll be a lot of fallout from that, and some of it hopefully will be very good. There'll be more of a amalgamation of forces, and lines will be drawn that aren't going to be crossed. So let's hope for that. And also, with regard to that, Japan importantly endorsed the multinational Hormuz security mission statement this week. And when questioned about it, Defense Minister Koizumi said, yes, we're on board with that, with the other countries. It does not directly imply Japanese military participation, but we are a member of the group and we've signed off on it. So there'll be some Q&A going on in the Diet about what that actually means, but until push comes to shove, you're not going to know, but at least Japan is a part of that. And the larger point is Japan just continues to normalize strategic thinking in ways that would have been deemed politically impossible a decade or so ago. It's not dramatic. It's not too loudly. If you're not watching this show and if you're just reading the Japan Times, you might miss it, but it is going on, and it is of significant velocity that it is going to change Japan in very important ways. So in wrapping up, I'm sitting here at the Hotel New Otani, preparing for the 30th anniversary of the automobile club I set up 30 years ago. But I can't help noticing how different Japan's anxieties were back then. 30 years ago, the concerns were stagflation, deflation, and whether Japan's best years had already passed, because at that point in time, the bubble had burst and Japan was kind of collapsing down. It's kind of been like that ever since. But the concerns today are almost the opposite: inflation, strategic competition, energy insecurity, demographic pressure, and resilience inside a far more dangerous geopolitical environment. And one thing about Japan always remains remarkably consistent, and I think many in the show will agree with that, and it's something that we all hold in awe, that Japan has this ability to adapt gradually, quietly, and often more effectively than many outsiders expect or anticipated. So it's important for us to watch this, to analyze it, to be careful how we think about Japan, and take the historical context, and given their appropriate weight, try and understand how Japan as a nation is going, what's going on in Japanese politics with the succession, with the revision, with all of these things, and how they impact, those of us who live here and do business here, or trade partners or diplomats who are assigned here. It's a very important country to have your fingers well inside what's going on, and I hope that this show provides some of that. The government's trying to stabilize the yen without frightening the markets. It's managing energy and security without creating a panic, and you can notice that very quickly. It's strengthening defense coordination without alarming the public that they're going totally military, and the South Koreans and the Chinese get up in arms. And it's maintaining alliance credibility at the same time, preserving room for strategic autonomy. And none of these balancing acts are easy in and of themselves, but this is all happening at the same time, and I think we're all beginning to understand that. Japan understands the nature of this environment it is entering, and it's adjusting accordingly. And I can't be more thankful for a prime minister like Sanae Takaichi at this particular point in time. She does have her issues. She has her strengths and her weaknesses like all of us, but she is significantly different than any prime minister that we've had in recent memory, and I really hold out a lot of hope and courage for her, and I wish her the best. And I will continue to be reporting as faithfully as possible without kind of sugarcoating things. But I think it's important to point out, what's good and what's bad. So this is a period where much of the world seems to be lurching from crisis to crisis, and incremental competence may turn into a valuable national characteristic of the Japanese, but it's something that we're going to continue to watch. Thank you very much for joining us. Maya, I'll turn it back over to you. We'll get into the Q&A. I haven't seen any cars approaching, but I think they'll probably start arriving pretty soon.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Timothy. Great briefing. And once again, so to everybody watching us, please let us know that you have been here by hitting like, subscribe, or follow. Also, leave your comments and thoughts in the comment section so that we can have a discussion from now. And if you're watching us during the week or later today, you can do the same once again, because if you leave any questions, we will address them during the next briefing. So, what I want to do
also,
is
the synopsis.
The synopsis. Yes, the synopsis goes out a couple of days after the briefing. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please let us know. Or you can find it on LinkedIn and also Substack. Or you can just visit the website of Langley Esquire. Again, please help us spread the word and share these briefings with your friends, colleagues, and acquaintances as well, so that they can gain this sense of what is going on in Japan and what the environment for everybody who does business here and lives here is. So, Timothy, now let me start with the very first question that came this morning, and everybody knows that it came from Byron. Now, I have...
Good morning, Byron.
Good morning, Byron. And yes, let's see what Byron says. He says, in view of Trump's Z summit, do you foresee many more Taiwanese companies investing in Japan and many more Taiwanese nationals planning second homes in Japan? Might Japan offer any special incentives in those respects? Also, do you foresee greater defense cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines as a result of the fallout of the summit?
Yeah, I think the answer there for both of those is obviously yes. Even President Trump said so, that it would be in Taiwan's best interest, TSMC, to begin expanding, to build bigger plants in Arizona. He didn't say anything about Kumamoto, but, he's all about America. But he did carry a couple of signals. It doesn't look like he is giving any green lights to China. He wants status quo to remain. But I think ultimately when he's gone, and he said, I don't think that they will move while I'm president. And that's probably true. But there might be some testiness in decades in the future. And that could compromise the chip building prowess of TSMC. So while the getting is good, you should be expanding. And I think that goes for individuals as well who want to expand their security by having a second house in Japan. Or, I mean, if you're Taiwanese, you'd like to be close to Taiwan. Japan is pretty close, but I think it's not so comfortable for Chinese to come into Japan. They're always watching. Few people make the distinction between the Chinese and the Taiwanese Chinese, and there is a latent discrimination here. If it was me, I'd probably want to go to the United States or someplace a little bit more expansive than coming to Japan. But Japan has its attractions too. So I don't know. I'm not advising one way or the other on that. But I do agree with the theme of your questions, Byron, that it's for future purposes, it would be a good idea to kind of expand that, because China's not going away. China's not going to give up on bringing Taiwan back into the fold. And there's only so much that history and military weight from the United States can do.
All right, thank you for that. And related to this is a question from Aloha Apostle. He writes, what is Japan's reaction to the Trump visit to China?
おはようございます。移動します。この後でします。 Sorry, what
You
was that, Maya? I was interrupted.
right. What is Japan's reaction to the Trump visit to China? Is there concerns that the US will be too cozy with Z? Is Taiwan a big issue for Japanese, well, the Japanese in general, and not good? It was China's biggest warning to Trump.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's always China's biggest warning to anybody that visits them. It's always one of the first things that tumbles out of their mouths. Um, but the reality is that Taiwan, the United States has Taiwan's back. It is holding some of the armaments that it was committed. I think $10 billion of armaments the United States has committed to Taiwan. Some of that has gone through. Some of that still requires a little bit more of the president authorizing that. And I think maybe in his discussions with Xi, he 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 might have withheld that or promised to withhold that. But yeah, I think the president said it himself. You just need to parse what was said and what it means and what he left unsaid to kind of understand that. That's not quite my ballywick, and it is a little bit early to kind of make predictions.
right. Okay, so moving on towards the economy, and I think that you touched upon that in the beginning of this briefing, today's briefing, but could you please once again outline, just give an answer to this question by Hiroko-san? She says, I'm reposting the question from last week. When the government intervened, where did the resources come from? Did they come from the US Treasury securities?
Okay, so like I said, 1.2 trillion of reserves are held. They're not just in the United States. They're not just U.S. Treasury bonds. They're companies, they're shares, they're stocks, there's bonds from all sorts of countries. They're futures. There's commercial paper, that sort of thing. So what the Ministry of Finance does is that it sells those on the open market. The market is ready to purchase them. They have a price certain on the day of sale. So if they have, for example, 1,000 shares of IBM stock, and they just want to convert that so they have the cash to bring down the yen, they're going to use that cash to do that. Then they would sell that 1,000 shares of IBM stock, but it does upset the market. The rest of the market notices that. And for the Japanese government, it's usually not 1,000 shares, it's like 10,000 or 1,000,000 shares. So it's big, and people watch it, and then they go to other assets that the Japanese hold, and then they try and get out of the market quickly, because once the Japanese sell, then it impacts the sale price and the stock price of that commodity. So it is a big deal when the Japanese intervene. It sends a shockwave throughout the international market, and the United States doesn't like that. You know, you didn't tell us, you didn't warn us, you didn't give us, because otherwise I would have bought the securities or I would have sold the securities. It's like insider trading. But when Japan does that, it moves enormously bigly. It moves very bigly. And it's not just a little bit of money, but it's a lot of money that is required to move just even incrementally the yen. So I hope that's somewhat responsive. It's a great question, though.
Right. Okay. And then one more thing that I guess that some of you probably know, but just maybe it's better to talk about it briefly here, is that the reserves are in Japan. They are held by the Ministry of Finance. And the operational hand of the Ministry of Finance is basically the Bank of Japan in such cases, because the Ministry of Finance decides when to intervene. And when they decide to do that, they work closely with the Bank of Japan. They issue, actually, are they orders, called orders to do that?
Sell orders, yes. Yeah.
Yes, sell orders, and then the Bank of Japan, well, basically does the operational part of this. So, and then moving on, since we're talking about the yen and it also relates to the economy of the country, Hiroko-san also wrote, there was, well, the OECD survey of the economy of Japan 2026 came out, and the Secretary General, Mr. Matthias Cormann, stated that Japan may need to raise the consumption tax to around 15 to 20% in the long term to sustain social security for an aging population. What are your thoughts on his statement? Timothy?
They have been saying that for quite a while. Japan can't continue this march where the budget is supplemented by more than 50% of debt financing. The budget that the prime minister just passed on what, April 10th? She was like 10 days late.
Yeah, 11th,
The
wasn't it? I think, maybe.
on the 11th. So it was the largest national budget, annual budget passed to date, and 50% of that is generated by selling bonds. And that's why we're always talking about the Bank of Japan and the dividend that these bonds, these 10-year bonds or these 5-year bonds are generating. And the better the dividend, the more that they can sell them, but they have to pay it back at some point in time. And so this has been going on for such a long time, since the collapse of the bubble economy. And so most pundits say, look, you can only generate money by your consumption tax or by selling assets that the government holds, but doing it, 50% of it by debt, that's not a good recipe. What you need to do is increase the amount of money that you're pulling in, and the only valve that you have to kind of tighten or loosen is the consumption tax. And consumption tax at 8% for foodstuffs and 10% for everything else, it's just not going to cut it. You need to double it, like we do in Europe, like we do in certain countries in South America. But that's the food that the economy needs, and you guys aren't doing it because you're afraid you're going to get kicked out of power. You're afraid you're going to lose your votes, and so you keep debt financing your annual budget. It's not sustainable.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And just going a step back to the previous question about TMCS, TMC, the Taiwanese, yes.
TSMC, right?
Yes, sorry for that. Percival 3 says Japan should take the chance to attract more silicon fabs from Taiwan TSMC to Kyushu. These times require more faster moves. Yes,
Oh, they're doing
definitely.
it. They're opening
They're
Taiwanese Chinese schools. They're opening nurseries. They've got lots of apartment buildings. Kumamoto was chosen because of the vast expanse of farmland that's available there. So it is going on. It's going on at a very significant clip.
indeed. All right. And moving on towards the next question from, give me a second, please. Okay, so from Aloha Apostle, he says, what is Japan's... Oh, no, this is the previous one, excuse me. What are your thoughts on the aging demographics of the voting electorate here in Japan? It seems that the younger vote is going to continue to move towards the tech-savvy parties. Are the parties adapting to this? Timothy, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, actually, I received a request from Wired magazine to educate them or to give them an insight into what's going on with social media usage within the lower house and in the upper house. And when I pursued that request, what they wanted me to do was introduce them to my contacts so that they could approach them independently. And I said, no, thank you. Right. But there is interest. It's a similar question to the one that's being asked. Is the social networks, is the ability of you to reach out to your audience, to your voters, to your constituents, is that being maximized? How is that being used? What platforms are being used? So there's a lot of interest there. As you know, X, formerly Twitter, I think their largest market, maybe outside of the United States, maybe greater than the United States, is Japan. The Japanese really contribute to content on X. So it is being used, and the smaller political parties are becoming very savvy. Sanseito is particularly adept at using that and connecting with their voter base. And the voter base is younger. Yes, the 20s, the 30s are particularly, they're more favorable to Takaichi, but at less of a temperature than it was when she first became prime minister. And the older people, it used to be the foundation, the rock stone of the LDP. They almost always are very conservative, but they're not connected on social media. and they're becoming smaller and smaller as the depopulation and as the numbers of them dwindle, but the people in the younger groups are coming up. They're not coming up in huge numbers, but it is important to note that they are becoming a little bit more politically engaged and involved, and that's one of the keystones of the social networking that's going on. So yes, you're going to see much more of that and much more adroit use of it. The LDP is getting in on it. The Prime Minister, as I reported, she's using X in not just in Japanese, but in English too. And just this week, I started receiving the same kind of flow of information from the Treasury Secretary, from the Finance Minister. So that's pretty interesting.
Right, they're getting on board. Better late
Yes, they
than
are.
never. Yes, better late than never, but still. Yes, okay. And of course, Aloha Apostle says Takaichi is a fresh a fresh breath of air where other PMs have failed to stand on common sense principles. They should have learned from Trump on being a strong, decisive leader. Okay,
Who's this?
this is Aloha Apostle.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, you can see not signature moves, but yes, I think they're picking the cues from what Trump has done. Decisiveness, timeliness, being a little bit bold, being a little bit more aggressive. You can see that now, and use of social media as well. I agree with you.
Right. And Peter Pan says, you are a great supporter of Prime Minister Takaichi, Tim, which I guess, yes, is yeah, very true to at this point of time at least. And then, okay, now, right. So I think that, okay, Hiroaki also says, he has that, let me find it. I apologize. I'm just trying to, to see if the,
I'm
uh,
waiting for Hiroaki to run for prime minister. I think he would make a great prime minister.
oh, yes. So Hiroaki's question is about Mr. Koichi's non-attendance at the meeting of Kokuryoku.
Yeah.
So is that true that she's not
Yes,
going
it's
to
true.
attend?
It's
Mm-hmm.
true, and I think it's kind of cool. I think she doesn't need to be there. This is a group that we're going to set up for you, madame. You don't need to join, but we would like you to show up at the launch, which will be on the 21st, the Thursday. Would you please put that on your schedule? Thank you very much. I'm in the background working to put this thing together. So you just have a cigarette at the Conte. I'll take care of it. I think that's the mode. I don't read too much into that.
Right. Yes. Well, at the end of the day, she's a busy person indeed, and then she doesn't have to go into the weeds of, I mean, organizational, let's say, organizational meetings, right?
Can I expand just a little bit on that? And I know I
Please
get
do.
long-winded sometimes, Maya,
Yes.
but
Please
this
do.
this support group, it's not a faction, and it's set up by Mr. Aso. And so you have to be a little bit Machiavellian about why he would do that and who are the critical features, the critical members. It's a power base, and it's for the support of the Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi today. But it could be the supporter of somebody else later. And that's why Konotaro, who is in Mr. Aso's faction, has been kind of back in the background, very quiet, perhaps groomed. I don't know. But also, Mr. Hayashi is not in that group, too. He is another contender. Um, the defense minister is Mr. Koizumi. He is a contender for prime minister. But I think those who are in the know, Koizumi, come on, give me a break. I mean, he looks like he looks like he will be prime minister, but we can do better than that. And I think that's, it's a layup shot for what is coming down, and what's coming down is not here. It's not this year. She's got another 2 years in her prime ministership. She'll, if she wants to, if her health stays, uh, um, up to standard, she can probably repeat again. I think there would be no firm opposition to that. But ultimately, she will give it up, and there will be another contender. And I think this is what that is about. So it's really interesting to see Taro also always at the forefront, always kind of in the background doing. 88 years old. My gosh.
Okay, right. And then one more question from Aloha Apostle. He says, I have not heard about any efforts of the minority liberal leaning parties, any efforts to regain seats or influence. I only see that they have dedicated workers at train stations passing out kirashi. Okay,
Yeah.
any thoughts on this, Timothy?
So now is not the time to do that. Now is the time for legislation. So before the passage of the budget, before April 1st, all the energy, I mean, some of it is going to the bills, how many bills are going to be passed and that sort of thing, but it's mostly about the budget. Once the budget passes, then that energy is dedicated to passing the bills. There are 60 bills, 68 bills that they want to pass in this session. They're not going to get through all of them, but that's where that energy is going. When the diet ends on June 16th, and forgive me, last week I think I said July 16th or July 17th. The diet will go until June 17th, in 2 months' time. Once that finishes, then everybody kind of goes on vacation. But that's when things happen. That's when politics starts. That's when you begin to see a lot of maneuvering. So you begin to see that a little bit more. The train stations are just to keep people familiar with your face, who you are, you concerned. I don't listen to you, but I see you when I go to the station. Just as I said earlier, presence carries significance, and it doesn't mean they listen to you, but they do think that you are concerned enough to show up there and wear a bright tie and pass out a chirashi. But it's kind of normal politics. You don't see it on the front burner until later in the session, and unless there's some sort of a controversy or something going on, people are not. People are afraid of being critical, except Bunshun, being critical of the prime minister because retribution comes from that. And if you have a strong prime minister, then they can visit retribution on you quite easily and quietly. Whereas if it's a weak prime minister, it takes a little bit more effort. It's a little bit more obvious. Sometimes it's not as effective. So even within the LDP, people who are critical of the prime minister, they're keeping their mouths shut because they want to have a committee chair. They want to be included on these meetings. They want to have political weight within the LDP, so they're keeping their mouths closed.
Right, and an observation from Percival here. Compared to other countries, here in Japan, political involvement is quite low and is mainly from the older brackets. I
Political
tried
involvement.
political involvement. He says, I tried really hard to bring friends here, but there was no interest from most citizens, and I'll
Is
keep trying.
is this Percival?
Yes.
Okay, so in my briefing, I talked about AMPO in 1966 and 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, probably most of the people that are in the program, they weren't even born then. I know, Maya, you weren't born until the 1990s
No, until 2000, the
or
beginning of
2000. Forgive me.
century. So don't make me
So
that that ancient.
So in the 1960s, there was political activity, and they showed up in mass, and they threw sticks, and they formed snake lines. And when I went to Okinawa as a kid, when I was 11 years old, when I was 13 and 14 years old, they had huge riots in Japan. Get the Americans out, return to Okinawa, give Okinawa back to us, and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of political involvement, and I think the guys that were throwing sticks in the Tokyo University, they're now bureaucrats. They're now in the government. They're part of the system. And I think what the lesson that they learned was it doesn't pay to be a political demonstrator. It doesn't. It brands you, and it doesn't generate. And the police are too strong, and the politics are too weighty. There are better ways to do that, and so getting involved politically and being identified, even though you might have a mask and a helmet on, I think they learned a lesson there. It seems to me so.
Right.
It is hard to get the Japanese invigorated about a political issue and to go on marches. They do, but it's not like in the 1960s by any stretch.
Right. Okay. And there is a question from Percival, another one which is not related to politics. Timothy, was it or how hard was it to get that sailing license in Japan?
Not difficult at all. There is a group that helps foreigners get the sailing license. There's no sailing license; it's a boating license. It's the same for a cruising boat that's got an engine on it or a sailboat. So there's a group called TSPS, Tokyo Sail and Power Squadron, tsps.org, and they get together and they help you in English prepare for and take the test. And they have on the water training. They show you how to tie the knots and stuff, the things that are going to be tested. And yeah, it's not difficult. You should just go to TSPS, sign on. If you go to the blog, which is called Scuttlebutt, there are lots of articles. About 30% of them were written by me, so you can you can read a
Right.
lot of stuff about. Yes, I'm a very frustrated, unsuccessful writer, but I still write a lot.
All right. It's better to be an unsuccessful writer than an unsuccessful sailor, you know.
Yes, that's for sure.
Right. Okay. So good. And to everybody, yes. Oh, we've got one more question from Aloha Apostle who says, I saw an article about the Osaka Metro wanting a refund for the electric EV buses used during the expo. Did this make the news and was the expo successful?
I
Timothy.
saw that. I saw that, and I'm not up to speed enough. I did read the article. I didn't prepare notes for it. Yeah, one of the reasons, this is a sideways glance at the answer. One of the reasons why Ishin is willing to come in holding their nose and be affiliated with the LDP is because they don't want the mess of the expo to be more exposed. So you can read between the lines there. One of the reasons why they gave important concessions is to have this affiliation so that should things becoming a little bit more difficult and people are digging a little bit deeper, we can somehow take care of that. And I think that that's one of the reasons. I don't want to put too much emphasis. I don't want to say people were stuffing you know um, cash into containers or something like that. But it is Osaka, right? And Osaka has a bit of a reputation there, as many foreign companies, including Universal Pictures, have discovered.
Okay, thank you for that. And somebody with a handle name on YouTube, handle name of Peacock01, says, is your commentator a Red Dwarf fan? And then I just checked what Red Dwarf is. And well, the first answer that came up is that the most common type of star in the universe of a cult classic British science fiction comedy television show. So I have no idea where the question came from and what the connotation is. So Peacock, please forgive us for not being very adequate, in answering your question. Maybe you can help us with some context here. And well, maybe we can answer your question next time when you provide the context. Forgive me and forgive us, because you may have noticed that in Japan, so the cultural influences here come mostly from the United States and not so much from Europe. So we may watch some British movies and comedies, but most of whatever comes from the United States. Yes, okay, thank you very much for this. And yes, okay. So thank you to everybody who stayed with us until now for this 1 hour and 8 minutes. Timothy, thank you so very much for delivering the briefing. I know that well, it hasn't been easy to prepare for well, that's the celebratory lunch for, well, the club, and also for delivering the briefing on the same morning. But I
Compared to
appreciate.
dealing with you, Maya, that's a walk in the park.
Of course, I know that, but you're lucky. I mean, all the time, because the distance is so
At
large
least we're
that
separated. That's right.
yes, you can
So
say
somebody,
whatever you
yeah,
can say
somebody.
whatever you want. So,
That's right. I feel somewhat protected until our paths cross again, and then I've got to bring bandages with me. But somebody said, I thought you guys were in the same environment. I thought you were in the same room or separated or something like that. But no, thank God.
no. No, so technology nowadays provides the means, for all these briefings where Timothy can report from anywhere on the other side of the Tokyo Bay or even in Tokyo, and then I can sit here comfortably at home.
Having a martini. Yes.
Yes, and a cigarette as well. Yes. Okay, so to everybody
Thank you
once
for your
again.
work, Maya.
Oh, and for yours too. Yes,
Thank you.
it's always a pleasure to to tease you from the a distance, of course. All right. So once again, to everybody, thank you very much for today. Again, please help us spread the word of these briefings because, again, we do not charge for them, even though Timothy, usually says, yes, yes, send the money.
Yeah,
Sorry.
send money.
Yes. All right. We'll see you once again next Sunday, 8:20, and I hope to see you all. And please bring your friends to the briefings as well. And we're going to do the Q&A once again. If you have questions, comments, and just want to say something about Japanese politics, do that in the comments, and we'll talk about that next week. Timothy, enjoy the meeting, enjoy the lunch. Enjoy the day too, and to everybody else, enjoy the night if you are on the other side of the ocean, or have a wonderful Sunday today. Yes,
Thanks for
thank you.
joining.
See you next
Thanks,
time.
Maya.
Thank you.